I realized that there was a lot more to be done and a lot more to be said with sort of the narrative arc of a soldier's experience. And so I went back and I wrote Bravo Company, and I did that by following these men. I followed them from their training and workup to their deployment in Afghanistan. But I don't think that there's a lot of books that then trace that arc back to the United States when people come home.
An excerpt from today's guest, who follows a combat-hardened 82nd Airborne Division company in which half of its paratroopers earned the Purple Heart. Marine combat veteran and author Ben Kesling is here, and I'll speak with him right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. Welcome back. And before we get into the show, remember to click that follow button on the podcast to be notified of our future fantastic guests, like the author we're speaking with today. And thank you. Today's guest is a Midwest correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, where he focuses on domestic security and veterans issues. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Harvard Divinity School and previously served as a Marine Corps infantry officer in Iraq and Afghanistan. His book is called Bravo Company: An Afghan Deployment and Its Aftermath. And author Ben Kesling joins us now. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
It's a real honor, sir. You wrote this book in a different way, using the language of the infantry soldier. Why did you take that approach?
Well, I used the infantryman's language in a number of ways, I think, and both in the very literal sense of using a lot of profanity, which is the common patois of the infantry soldier, but also I used sort of the language that goes through infantrymen and now all infantry soldiers, so women as well. But when I wrote this story, it was all men in the infantry, but I used the language of things that go through their minds. So I talk about sort of the thoughts that happen in a moment's passing time, right? Like anybody who's been in the military or has been in a combat zone knows how much can be packed into a fleeting moment, a blink of an eye. And I think that when you say using the infantryman's language, I think that language is something that allows us to better understand and unpack what it's like to have so much happen in a split second of time in combat. And then also the infantryman's language is that profanity, which is stock and trade. But
yeah,
I don't use it. I don't use it in a way to be, I don't use it in a way to be like pornographic or to get cheap thrills out of using that kind of language or talking about the violence that happens in a combat zone. I use it to be as stark and to present it as objective a picture of what it's like to deploy and to go through the so many things that you go through and see, the horrible things, the hilarious things, the awful things, the profound things. So anyway, that's why I use the language that I used.
That makes sense. I was remembering, I wrote a book several years ago about the mafia in Philadelphia, and I was working with a FBI agent. I had optioned his story, and after the first draft, we'd worked closely together, and he said, I love it, Rob, but there's just not enough cussing in it, and doesn't feel real because it has to be the language of the street. And so right. I had to add it in, it wasn't my forte.
I actually excised some of the cursing in the book, because at a certain point you're like, can guys on deployment really say the F word that much? I'm like, well, yeah, and more. I find very, very many ways to use it. But yeah, it's important to be able to use that masterfully without sort of overdoing it and beating people over the head with it,
Absolutely. And I actually put a little paragraph at the beginning of the book that my use of it reflected the language of the street.
Right.
And it was not gratuitous, but that's how they spoke. And in South Philadelphia.
Right, right. Yeah, and for Bravo Company, for my book, again, like I'm not it's not an exercise in profanity and coarseness. It's just sort of the way, the way it is,
Yeah,
way people talk and the way people think.
yeah, absolutely. Now you follow this company like Ambrose did with Easy Company through the war, but you also follow them back into civilian life and their struggles. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I want to take you back to, I met Bravo Company in 2019. I write at the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Pentagon for the Wall Street Journal, and I met them when I was doing a story about a reunion they had. And they had a reunion 10 years after they got back from the deployment that I talk about in the book. So I met them because they got back from their deployment, and for 10 years they had a couple suicides in the company, and they had some suicidal ideations, and some men were having trouble adjusting back to life in the civilian world. And so they had the VA and a veteran service organization brought these men together for a reunion, and I covered that reunion for the paper. And then after writing about the reunion and not really delving a whole lot into their deployment, I realized that there was a lot more to be done and a lot more to be said with sort of the narrative arc of a soldier's experience. And so I went back and I wrote Bravo Company, and I did that by following these men. Again, they were all men at the time because it was 2009. I followed them from their training and workup to their deployment in Afghanistan. And, there's lots of memoir, there's lots of books written about combat experiences and what happens overseas. But I don't think that there's a lot of books that then trace that arc back to the United States when people come home, because soldiering for the vast majority of people is not the majority of their life, right? Soldiering is an extraordinary experience that they experience as young men and now young women. And then they come home and they're citizen soldiers, and they transition back into living a life out of uniform. And I wanted to capture that experience. And so I followed them when they came home, and the 10 years of reckoning with that deployment that they had after returning home. And I think it's something that gives its poignancy, and it makes it something that civilians can read and understand what it's like to be a soldier, to be deployed in a combat zone. And I think it can also help soldiers who have been there better understand their own experience, and that the experience they're having coming home is something that's it's unique in their own way, but it's part of a larger pattern. And everyone who deploys and comes home feels and goes through similar experiences. And I wanted to capture that with the book.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Next time, we learn the story of Philadelphia's only Vietnam War Medal of Honor recipient, Michael Crescents, with author Kevin Ferris.
He was credited, obviously, not only with saving people's lives. Bill Stafford says he wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for Michael. And we called it No Greater Love based on the Bible verse, no greater love hath anyone than to lay down their life for their friends. And here was someone who was willing to do that.
Another reason to click that follow button to be notified when the episode releases. And before we return to the conversation, if you're enjoying the story of an airborne company adjusting back to civilian life, check out our earlier program with wounded combat veteran Benjamin Sledge and his book, Where Cowards Go to Die.
That's the toughest part about readjusting into, civilian society. It's like 1 minute you're overseas, everybody's trying to kill you. And then like the next you're home and everybody's so aloof because these wars have been going on forever. They're like, oh my gosh, did you hear it's pumpkin spice latte season? And you're like, cool.
It's show 169 from season 2, and you'll easily find it in our past episodes. How are the men doing now, 10 years on?
Well, since the reunion that they had called Operation Resiliency, they've had 0 suicides.
That's great.
Thank God. And they've reconnected. They're talking. They're talking to each other. They're being a support network. And what was so unique about their reunion was a lot of times when you get out you can become a free floating particle in the world, right? You are unmoored from your team, unmoored from the military. You become a civilian, kind of working through some of these things on your own. And what this reunion that these men sought to do was to remind them that they are part of a team, and the reunion, Operation Resiliency, it brought the entire company back together,
Wow.
so that you could have men who had congruent experiences, who, the person to your left and the right were again on your left and right a decade down the road. And the idea was that by having the people who were there with you, again, being there with you, those strong arms around you, the realization that they are their brother's keepers, could do something that no amount of money, no amount of therapy, no amount of anything that the VA or any service organization can throw at somebody can replace having your brothers, or now this, sisters in arms, being there, talking to you, providing you that support.
That's so good to hear. How has the reaction been from the readers in the community?
As we're talking, the book has been out for a couple weeks now, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from folks. I'm very happy to hear from military folks that, because military folks will read military books and be quite critical of them. And I think that the feedback that I'm getting is that the goals that I sought to achieve in writing this, I think that they have come through. And when you write a book, it goes out there into the world, and you never know what's going to happen. And I'm, at this point, I'm happy to see that it's being sort of word of mouth, by people who say, "Hey, this is worth reading," and that means a lot, when you have people recommending it to other people. And I really do think that there's something in here for so many people. There's something in here for family members. There's something in here for civilians, for lawmakers, for people who send men and women into war, to read a story of a unit going to combat and coming home, and realizing that there's this incredible debt that we incur as troops. And there's this incredible debt that we owe to troops when we send them to war. It's not just paychecks for a couple of years and then they're out. No, like there's something there for the rest of their lives that we have to recognize and accept and own up to as a society.
Now, not only are you an author, but to close, I'd like to ask you about your experience being on Jeopardy as a 2-day champion. I thought that would be fun to close with.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. And so all my resume as, going to graduate school, being I'm a Marine Corps infantry officer myself. I was in for 6 years, all these deployments, and everybody wants to know about Jeopardy.
Sure.
Yeah, I was on during the Alex Trebek years, and I lost on my the third game I played because I didn't answer a daily double in the form of a question. It was just a horrible way to go out, but that Jeopardy, experience and I think that informs other things I do. It informs like writing this book because, Jeopardy, the folks at Jeopardy make a big point to say, this is not trivia. This is a knowledge game. And I'm like, okay, got you. But like, yeah, it's like, in order to be good at something like Jeopardy, you have to be curious about a whole bunch of things and want to ask questions about them and also get things right. And I think that informs stuff like my reporting and writing the book Bravo Company. I wanted to dig a little deeper to get to a deeper meaning of things, and I wanted to get it right.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree. Do you remember what, I know you didn't ask it as a question, but do you remember the answer that you missed out on?
Oh, yes. The answer was, well, the answer should have been, what is in situ? And I got it right. But hey, you know, you gotta follow the rules. That's
Yep.
you learn that in the Marine Corps, you learn that in the Army, and daggone it, you learn it on Jeopardy.
Yeah, it's funny. I watch the show, and I'm happy if I get one answer entire show. I'm, I feel like a winner. So that you're a 2-day champion is amazing, as well as the book. So
Thank you.
Absolutely. The book is called Bravo Company, an Afghan Deployment and Its Aftermath. Ben, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. Next time, we learn the story of Philadelphia's only Vietnam War Medal of Honor recipient, Michael Crescents, with author Kevin Ferris.
He was credited, obviously, not only with saving people's lives. Bill Stafford says he wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for Michael. And we called it No Greater Love based on the Bible verse, no greater love hath anyone than to lay down their life for their friends. And here was someone who was willing to do that.
Another reason to click that follow button to be notified when the episode releases. And if you like what you hear, leave a review or a rating, or just click the follow button. And be sure to check out our Point in the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore. I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point in the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.